Sup, dude? During the majority of the 2010s, John Wall was one of the most terrifying point guards in the league. He was aggressive, built like a tank, and moved so damn fast I thought his pregame routine was railing lines of pure Colombian cocaine. That was more so an 80s thing, so I doubt it, but you get what I'm trying to say. The dude was a horrifying sight for a defender to see in front of him. Wall danced with that ball like it was his lady, blowing by whatever schmuck stood in his way. Then he could make his choice of finishing with power or finesse. He was the ballerina of bounce, pirouetting his way through the D. His layups were a thing of beauty, and I'm not gonna lie, I may have edged to them once or twice. It's just impossible to watch this 360 lay and not immediately start jacking off. I'm kidding. It's usually Sean Livingston midi turnarounds that get me. Whatever, that's besides the point. What I'm trying to get across here is that John Wall was a demon. Sadly, his career wasn't as long as most hoped for, and because of this, it's a possibility people forget about him one day. Like Danny Granger or Brandon Roy. In this video, I'm gonna make sure that doesn't happen by showing you just how cool the dude was. To fully understand the demon that was prime John Wall, you must have knowledge of his upbringing. Allow me to explain. During his childhood, John only saw his dad when visiting him in prison. The only way he got to talk to him was when separated by a thick piece of glass. It wasn't ideal, but to a little boy, that's just where his dad lived. He was just a kid who didn't understand. He loved getting to ride in the car for 2 hours to visit him. At 9 years old, the visits ended though. His dad got released from prison and John was so happy to have him in his life. But sadly, the happiness wouldn't last. With their family finally all together, they got a cabin at White Lake and spent a few days there. John described it as the best time of his life. Unfortunately, it would end in tragedy. You see, his father wasn't released for serving his time. He was released because he was terminally ill with liver cancer. And the time he spent playing with his kids in the water caused his wound to get infected, leading to a hemorrhage. John described the smell of his father's bleeding as horrific. He was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, soon after his release, he passed away. Getting his father back and then immediately losing him gave John an anger that would turn him into one badass little kid. His nickname was Crazy J. He broke into cars, homes, got into fights, got shot at, shot back, you name it, he probably did it. He was extremely volatile and would constantly reject the authority of adults. On the court, this made him practically uncoachable, and he was also a huge dick to his teammates. This would eventually catch up to him after his first 2 years of high school basketball. He transferred to a new school to repeat his sophomore year, but he didn't make the varsity basketball team because of his bad attitude. Although filled with rage, the embarrassment of not even getting picked made John realize he had a problem. His mom, who worked her ass off to raise him and his siblings, was a big reason for this realization. She would constantly tell him to not be like his father. That reminder, along with not making the team, motivated John to a whole new level. He transferred to Word of God Christian Academy and evolved as a man. He actively worked at being coachable, being a better teammate, and improving his overall demeanor. His efforts paid off. Not only did he become a better person, but he was giving dudes business on the court, becoming the best point guard in the nation. He put together quite possibly the sickest high school mixtape of all time and had colleges watering at the mouth. The one he eventually committed to was Kentucky, joining future All-NBA center DeMarcus Cousins and Chinese legend Eric Bledsoe. Wall brought the swag back to Kentucky, having one of the greatest seasons in college basketball history. One season was all he needed because in every mock draft he was picked to go number 1. This came true June 24th, 2010. Washington took him with the first pick and the rest was history. In his first 8 games as a Wizard, Wall let the league know he wasn't to be fucked with, averaging 18 points, nearly 10 assists, over 3 steals, all while shooting 37% from 3 and 44% from the field. Washington fans weren't depressed for the first time since 1978. After Wall's blistering hot start, he dealt with a foot and knee injury that would force him to miss 12 of the next 19 games. Luckily, after he stayed healthy and played out the rest of the season except for one game against Cleveland. He had to miss it because of a suspension he earned for throwing a punch at Zydrunas Ilgauskas. Through 69 games, nice, Wall had proven he was going to be a serious force in the league. He did have his weaknesses though, such as his broke jumper and turnovers, but he was just a rookie with tons of upside. His athleticism was through the roof. This made for some wild blocks and crazy finishes. In addition to that, he was amazing at getting his teammates buckets. He was the love child of LeBron James and Chris Paul. Although he was a beast, the Wizards were not. They missed the playoffs, and to make things worse, Blake Griffin won Rookie of the Year Ben Simmons style. The torment of losing continued throughout the next season. They finished with an abysmal 20-46 record, sitting at 14th in the East. Optimus Dime played just as well as the year before, but instead of his jump shot getting better, it got much worse. The dude shot an unbelievable 7% from 3. Meanwhile, as a rookie, he was near 30%. While that was extremely concerning, he was able to avoid injuries and suspension playing all 66 games. This would not be the case in year 3 because he hurt his knee and missed the first half of the season. Then once he returned in January, he revealed to everyone his jumper was still broke as hell, shooting 6% from 3 through his first 26 games. Finally though, in the games following, he took a little over 1 every night and knocked him down at a near 40% clip. Through his first 3 years, he improved at a pretty modest rate, but by year 4 he took a big step up and made his first All-Star team. A big reason for this was his improved long-range bomb. He continued his success from the prior year, knocking down 35% of his threes, and that was with like 4 times the amount of attempts he was used to taking. Another huge reason was Washington stopped sucking and became a playoff caliber team. This was in large part due to Wall's leadership as well as the rise of Bradley Beal. He was a sniper from deep, hitting over 40% of his shots from behind the arc. Come playoff time, Beal was progressing so fast he low-key became Washington's best player. He was scoring more than John on much better efficiency. This was one of John's biggest problems. He could score the ball, but it wasn't always the most efficient. That part of his game really showed in his first postseason. In round 1, he was making just 36% of his attempts. Luckily, they made light work of Chicago, but in round 2, his shooting woes continued. His field goal percentage wasn't improving, and he was chucking up bricks from deep. Because of that, Washington wasn't so lucky in that series, losing in 6. Although they weren't able to make it to the conference finals, this was a great sign for Wizards fans. They now had 2 stars and were competitive. They deserved it after being forced to watch Jan Vesely play. By the 2015 season, Wall put his defensive abilities on display, being named to the all-defensive second team. Standing at 6'4" with a 6'9" wingspan and elite physical qualities, the dude was a pest on D. He had great lateral quickness and cat-like reflexes. Along with that, his passing reached a whole new level, dishing out 10 assists a night. And then come playoff time, he led the entire league with 11.2. His elite playmaking paired fantastically with Beal, Paul Pierce, and Gortat. Those 3 along with Wall got buckets, each averaging double digits. They destroyed Toronto in a 4-game sweep, moving on to face the 60-win Hawks. In game 1, they came out swinging, taking the 1-0 series lead, but in the second quarter of that game, Wall fractured his hand in 5 different spots. This forced him to miss the next 3 games. Behind Beal and the other Wizards' solid play, they managed to keep up with the Hawks. Through 4 games, the series was tied at 2-2, and in game 5, Optimus Dime made his return. Sadly, this had no effect. Atlanta wiped the floor with them and moved on to the conference finals, where they would eventually get molested by LeBron. After being knocked out of the second round 2 years in a row, shit hit the fan in 2016. Washington finished with a 41-41 record and didn't even make the playoffs. The losing was clearly getting to Wall. This was shown in the 2016-17 season after he put together his most impressive year yet. Coming off of 2 off-season knee injuries, Wall reached the peak of his career, averaging 23 points, nearly 11 assists, and 2 steals. He was better than ever before, leading the Wizards to 49 wins. His regular season rampage would continue into the playoffs as he sought revenge on Atlanta. As a Hawks fan, what he did to us was unholy. Through the first 2 games of the series, he ripped us apart, taking a commanding 2-0 series lead, dropping an efficient 32-14 in game 1, then 32-9 in game 2. His insane play continued after that, but they dropped 2 of the next 3 games. Clearly, John didn't want to risk a game 7, so he went apeshit, putting up 42, shooting 16 for 25 from the field and 9 for 10 from the line. Hawks players definitely had night terrors in Cancun after that. Coming off such an amazing playoff series, with the help of Brad and co, Wall was confident he could take the Wizards far this time. There was a small problem though, a really small problem. His name was Isaiah Thomas, and he happened to be in the midst of his short, pun intended, but insane prime. The guy was 5'9" and completely violating fools. John was no exception. The little guy had no problem giving Wall buckets, but it wasn't like that peanut could guard him either. Because of this, the series was extremely competitive, going to 7 games, but John's efficiency came to bite him in the butt. In game 7, he choked, shooting 8 for 23, scoring 18 points. Meanwhile, Beal was on fire, dropping nearly 40 on amazing efficiency. This would mark the sad beginning of the end of Wall's prime. He earned his 5th and final All-Star selection in 2018, but dealt with many injuries, limiting him to just 41 games. They made the playoffs a final time, and John gave it his all, but they were sadly knocked out in the first round. The injury bug would continue to plague him from then on. Just 3 days after Christmas in 2018, he tore his Achilles, and that was pretty much it for his career. After that, he had to get surgery to remove bone spurs, which would sideline him for a long time, but it got much worse. He slipped and fell one day in his house and ruptured his Achilles. This forced him to sit out until 2020. When he returned, he was a Houston Rocket. He was good, but he just wasn't the same. Because of this, Houston wanted him to come off the bench, which he was totally not cool with, so he just sat out the entire year. It's a shame injuries had such a massive effect on a guy who was so exciting to watch. During his prime, he was arguably the best point guard in the East. I hated every time my Hawks had to go against him, but he was just so fun to watch. His game was electric. Two other guys who are extremely fun to watch are T-Mac and Melo. They put the ball in the hoop like nothing, and in very similar ways with different styles. Click here to watch the video I made determining who I think is the better scorer. Thanks for watching this one, hope you enjoyed, bye dude.